They mocked him for being honest, beat him, jailed him, and left him in the dark, just for refusing a bribe. But they didn't know that the boy in the tattered uniform would one day return, not as a victim, but as the most powerful police commissioner the region had ever known. This is the story of justice served cold, the kind that only grows stronger in silence. If you believe in karma, in destiny, and in the power of doing what's right no matter the cost, then stay with us. And don't forget to subscribe. 2 Real African Tales by Ha for more true life stories that shake the soul. Tell us in the comments which part of Africa are you watching from. In a quiet village surrounded by tall baobab trees and dusty red roads, there lived a dark-skinned young man named Obinna, whose braided cornrows always sat neatly beneath his battered police beret, a symbol of the pride he carried for a uniform that meant justice. His mother, Mama Ibel, soft-spoken widow who tied her brightly colored wrapper tight around her waist, had raised him and his 3 younger siblings in a cracked mud hut with walls made from hand-molded clay and love, though they had little. Mama Ebel always told him, "My son, never eat the fruit of stolen labor. If they give you a goat you didn't work for, it will eat your soul." Inspired by her wisdom, Obinna studied hard under the flickering oil lamp each night and became the first in the village to make it into the National Police Academy. He was just 21 when he arrived in the capital, a place where the buildings were tall, but morals were short. Fresh out of training, his black boots still new, and his eyes full of hope, he was posted to a small urban precinct, controlled by a corrupt senior officer named DSP Tund, a bald, pot-bellied man who wore his uniform like a crown and his bribes like a badge. Tund and his gang ran the station like a criminal syndicate, collecting fees from local businesses, shielding drug dealers, and extorting bus drivers. On his second week, Obinna watched as they released a known child trafficker because he paid a hefty donation. When Obinna protested, Tund laughed in his face and said, "Young man, if you want to survive here, you must learn to bend, or you'll be broken." But Obinna did not bend. He refused to collect a bribe during a routine highway patrol, instead arresting the well-connected man carrying stolen goods. That night, Tund summoned him behind the station, where 3 officers beat him with belts, calling him a disgrace. Obinna, bruised and defiant, dragged his battered body back to his post and filed a report, but the system was too dirty to care. Days later, false charges were brought against him: extortion, insubordination, and attempting to incite mutiny. They paraded him like a criminal, handcuffed and shirtless, while townspeople whispered and spat. The court paid, and pocketed gave him 5 years in prison. Mama Ebel collapsed upon hearing the verdict. She tried to raise her son's case with human rights lawyers in the city, selling her last goat to afford the trip, but no one listened to a widow from a nameless village. Obinna, inside the prison built of cracked cement and shattered dreams, spent his days breaking rocks and nights praying beneath a leaking roof. The guards called him Oga Morality, mocking his refusal to fall like the others. But he did not curse the system. Instead, he read law books, military history, and biographies of African revolutionaries. He trained doing push-ups in the dark, running in circles within the prison walls. And he listened carefully, quietly, to the stories of every inmate, memorizing every corrupt name they whispered. 5 years passed. When he stepped out, his face had hardened, his shoulders broader, and his eyes no longer smiled. Mama Ebel ran to embrace him, her wrapper soaked with tears, but he whispered, "Not yet, Mama. I'm not done." Obinna vanished for 2 years, traveling across states, working as a bodyguard for honest men, volunteering at security think tanks, and eventually securing a scholarship for further study in South Africa, where he earned a degree in criminal justice. But what shocked the nation was his triumphant return, not as an ordinary man, but as the newly appointed special advisor on police reform under the new president, a woman known for her anti-corruption stance. She had read Obinna's prison letters, published secretly by a prison chaplain, and was moved by his courage. Within a year, he was promoted to deputy commissioner, and by the next, commissioner of the National Police Force. His face was now on newspapers, his voice on radios, but his heart still beat with village pride. He returned to his home precinct, the same one where Tund ruled like a god, wearing a crisply ironed uniform, golden badges glinting in the sunlight. The new commissioner was escorted by armed convoys and a parade of clean-shaven officers. Tund, now old and hiding behind a desk job, was brought out in handcuffs. Pale and trembling, as Obinna read out the long list of charges: bribery, conspiracy, human trafficking, abuse of office. "You once said I'd be broken," Obinna told him, "but you forgot a tree that stands in the storm grows deeper roots." The media captured every second. His mother stood beside him, now dressed in lace and head tie, smiling through tears. That day, the entire village celebrated with music, pounding yam and dancers shaking their waists under the African sun. Obinna didn't just take revenge, he rewrote what justice looked like for the poor. But this was just the beginning, because behind every criminal Tund protected lay a deeper network of betrayal Obinna was determined to destroy. With his enemies now exposed, and the old chains of corruption cracking like dry firewood beneath his boots, Commissioner Obinna turned his focus to dismantling the deeper rot, the nationwide web of dirty politicians, criminal syndicates, and rogue police units that had turned justice into a market. He knew the task ahead was greater than his revenge, and that real reform was a battle of generations. His first step was symbolic. He relocated the police headquarters to a building once occupied by war criminals, renovating the compound with white stone walls, solar panels, and the carved faces of African heroes across the entrance pillars. Beneath the national flag fluttered a statue of a barefoot officer saluting, a tribute to every honest policeman who ever fell for standing tall. Obinna surrounded himself with a new generation of dark-skinned African men and women, sharp-eyed, braided-haired officers with fire in their hearts and truth on their tongues. Many came from rural villages like his, wearing their tribal beads beneath their uniforms and carrying their ancestors' discipline like hidden weapons. He restructured training academies, introduced body cameras, and implemented grassroots complaint systems in every region. But perhaps his boldest move came when he summoned a national tribunal to investigate every corrupt official tied to the crimes of the last regime. The streets whispered that the commissioner had become too powerful. But Obinna remained untouchable, protected not by bribes or bullets, but by the love of the people and the ghosts of those who had suffered in silence. He personally arrested 2 former governors who had once dined with drug lords. He shut down illegal detention centers and demanded public audits from every police station in the country. He was fierce, yes, but never cruel, when reporters asked him why he didn't. "Take revenge on the officers who beat him years ago," he replied. "Forgiveness is power. But I'll never let them wear this uniform again." Across the nation, songs were composed about him. Obinna, the Iron Heart; Obinna the Storm; Obinna who came back. Markets were named after him, and children carried toy batons with his name carved into them. But even in glory, he remained grounded. Every Sunday he visited his mother's compound in the village, where she now lived in a cement house with tiled floors and a large veranda shaded by mango trees. She still tied her wrapper the same way, her gray hair braided neatly. Yet each time he knelt before her to receive her prayers, she wept, not from sorrow, but from the joy of watching truth win. But fate, as it often does, tested Obinna again. A new drug cartel began operating along the northern border, led by a man known as Chief Ghost, a former intelligence officer turned warlord, who once served with the men that imprisoned Obinna. Chief Ghost's network ran deep, even into Parliament, and many feared that even Obinna couldn't reach him. But Obinna was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a movement, and a storm that rolled in quietly before it struck. Disguised in plain clothes, he infiltrated the border towns himself, walking dusty paths in simple caftones, speaking to traders, mothers, and street children. He collected names, routes, whispers in the dark. When he struck, it was with precision. Raids coordinated across 3 states. Corrupt customs officers arrested live on air, hidden warehouses exposed, trafficked girls rescued and wrapped in shawls by tearful social workers. The people rejoiced, but the fight was brutal. In one raid, Obinna was shot in the leg, and the nation held its breath as he lay unconscious in a city hospital. The image of his bandaged body, guarded by loyal officers with rifles pointed skyward, was broadcast across Africa. Street vendors paused. Markets grew quiet. And in a miracle that felt like folklore, he rose again in 10 days, limping but unbroken, declaring a bullet cannot stop a purpose. Chief Ghost, cornered and panicked, fled to the mountains. Obinna didn't pursue him immediately. Instead, he rebuilt the local police posts, trained orphans to become peace officers, and created a scholarship named after a boy he met in jail who never got out. His leadership became legend. He was invited to speak in Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, where his words were translated into Swahili, French, and Fulani. In one powerful speech beneath the African Union flag, he said, "Justice in Africa must wear an African face, dark, proud, unbought, and unafraid." When Chief Ghost was finally captured hiding in a hollowed tree trunk like a coward, it was a barefoot farmer who tipped off the police. When asked why, the man simply said, "Because Obinna is our own." In the final trial, Obinna sat in uniform, his commissioner's cap on the table, his braided hair now touched with gray. He watched as Chief Ghost wept before the court, surrounded by evidence of his crimes, and when the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, the courtroom clapped. Not because justice was done, but because justice now had a name they could trust. Years later, long after Obinna retired, statues of him stood in schools and police colleges. A new national holiday was declared, Integrity Day. On that day, across towns and villages, children would march in mini uniforms, singing songs about the officer who chose prison over a bribe and still rose to lead the nation. But perhaps the greatest legacy Obinna left was invisible in the heart of every young African child who now believed that doing the right thing wasn't weakness. That truth, no matter how long it slept, would always rise. Just like Obinna did.